The story takes place in Springfield, Ohio, a small town where everyone knows everyone, and secrets are hard to keep. The central characters are Jessica Miller, a 34-year-old marketing manager, and her husband, Michael Miller, a 36-year-old architect. They have 2 children, Lily, 8, and Ethan, 6. On the surface, their life seems perfect: a beautiful home, successful careers, and a loving family. But beneath the surface, cracks are beginning to show. Jessica had always been the life of the party, charismatic and ambitious. Michael, on the other hand, was more reserved, a man of few words but deep emotions. Their marriage had been strong for over a decade, but lately, Jessica had been feeling unfulfilled. The monotony of daily life, work, kids, chores, had started to wear her down. That's when she met Daniel Harris, a 32-year-old graphic designer at her office. Daniel was everything Michael wasn't: spontaneous, adventurous, and always ready with a witty remark. Their connection was instant, and what started as harmless flirting quickly escalated into something more. Jessica found herself drawn to Daniel's energy, and before she knew it, they were having an affair. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, Jessica received a text from Daniel. "Can't stop thinking about you. Meet me at the office tomorrow during lunch?" Jessica hesitated. She knew it was wrong, but the thrill was too intoxicating to resist. "Okay. But we have to be careful," she replied. The next day, Jessica and Daniel met at the office. They thought they were being discreet, but they didn't notice the cleaning lady, Maria, watching them from the hallway. Maria had worked at the office for years and knew all the employees well. She had always liked Jessica, but something about this situation felt off. Meanwhile, Michael had been growing suspicious. Jessica had been coming home late, her phone constantly buzzing with notifications. One night, while Jessica was in the shower, Michael checked her phone. His heart sank when he saw the messages from Daniel. He felt a mix of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. But instead of confronting Jessica, he decided to bide his time. He had a plan. Michael's plan was meticulous. He knew that if he confronted Jessica directly, she might deny everything or even leave him. Instead, he decided to use her affair against her. He began gathering evidence: photos of Jessica and Daniel together, copies of their text messages, and even recordings of their phone calls. He also started planting seeds of doubt in Jessica's mind, making her believe that Daniel was using her. One weekend, Michael told Jessica he was going on a business trip to Cleveland. "I'll be back in 3 days," he said, kissing her goodbye. But instead of going to Cleveland, Michael checked into the Sunset Inn, a small motel on the outskirts of Springfield. From there, he began putting his plan into motion. That evening, Jessica called Michael to check in. "How's Cleveland?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "It's fine. Just another boring business trip," Michael replied. What Jessica didn't know was that Michael was only a few miles away, watching her every move. The next day, Jessica and Daniel decided to spend the night together. They thought they were being careful, but Michael had anticipated this. He had paid Maria, the cleaning lady, to let him into the office after hours. "Just make sure the front door is unlocked," he told her. Maria reluctantly agreed, not realizing the full extent of Michael's plan. That night, Jessica and Daniel were in her office when the power suddenly went out. "What the hell?" Daniel muttered, fumbling for his phone's flashlight. Jessica felt a chill run down her spine. Something wasn't right. The power outage was just the beginning. As Jessica and Daniel tried to figure out what was happening, they heard a noise in the hallway. "Is someone there?" Jessica called out, her voice trembling. There was no response, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Suddenly, the door to the office burst open, and Michael stepped inside. "Michael? What are you doing here?" Jessica gasped, her heart pounding. Michael didn't answer. Instead, he lunged at Daniel, grabbing him by the collar. "You think you can steal my wife?" Michael snarled, his voice filled with rage. Daniel tried to fight back, but Michael was stronger. The two men struggled, knocking over furniture and sending papers flying. Jessica screamed, begging them to stop, but it was no use. In the chaos, Michael grabbed a stapler from the desk and hit Daniel over the head. Daniel collapsed to the floor, unconscious. "What have you done?" Jessica cried, dropping to her knees beside Daniel. Michael stood over them, breathing heavily. "This is your fault," he said coldly. "You brought this on yourself." Before Jessica could respond, Michael grabbed her arm and dragged her out of the office. "We're going home," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Jessica was too shocked to resist. She could only think about Daniel, lying unconscious on the floor. Jessica sat in the passenger seat of Michael's car, her mind racing. The drive home was silent, the only sound the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the radio. She kept replaying the scene in her office, Daniel's body hitting the floor, Michael's cold, unfeeling eyes. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but fear kept her silent. Michael's grip on the steering wheel was so tight his knuckles turned white, and Jessica knew better than to provoke him. When they arrived home, Michael didn't say a word. He simply unlocked the door and gestured for Jessica to go inside. The house was dark, the children asleep upstairs. Jessica felt a pang of guilt as she thought about Lily and Ethan. What would happen to them if Michael's plan succeeded? She couldn't let him destroy their family. Michael followed her inside and closed the door behind them. "Sit down," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Jessica obeyed, sinking into the couch. Michael stood over her, his expression unreadable. "You're going to do exactly as I say," he began. "If you don't, I'll make sure you never see the kids again." Jessica's heart sank. She had always known Michael was calculating, but this was something else entirely. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael smirked. "I want you to confess. Tell the police you killed Daniel in self-defense. If you do, I'll make sure the kids are taken care of. If you don't," he trailed off, letting the threat hang in the air. Jessica felt tears welling up in her eyes. She wanted to fight back, to tell Michael she wouldn't play along, but she knew he had the upper hand. He had planned this too carefully, and she was trapped. The next morning, Jessica woke up to the sound of sirens. She rushed to the window and saw two police cars pulling into the driveway. Her heart raced as she realized Michael's plan was already in motion. "Jessica Miller," an officer called as he approached the door. Jessica opened it, her hands trembling. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking. "We need you to come with us. There's been an incident at your office." Jessica glanced over her shoulder at Michael, who was standing in the hallway with a smug expression on his face. "It's going to be okay," he said, his tone dripping with false concern. "Just tell them the truth." Jessica was taken to the police station, where she was questioned for hours. The officers showed her photos of Daniel's body, the blood-stained office, and the stapler that had been used to kill him. Jessica felt sick to her stomach. She wanted to tell them the truth, to expose Michael for the monster he was, but she couldn't risk losing her children. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the detective in charge of the case leaned across the table. "Mrs. Miller, we have evidence that places you at the scene of the crime. We also have witnesses who saw you and Mr. Harris together on multiple occasions. If you don't start talking, things are going to get a lot worse for you." Jessica took a deep breath. I acted in self-defense," she said, repeating the lie Michael had forced her to tell. "Daniel attacked me, and I had no choice." The detective raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical, but he didn't push further. "We'll need to hold you here until the bail hearing," he said. "You're being charged with second-degree murder." Jessica felt the room spin around her. She had known this was coming, but hearing the words aloud was like a punch to the gut. As she was led to a holding cell, she couldn't help but wonder if she would ever see her children again. While Jessica sat in her cell, Michael was busy putting the final pieces of his plan into place. He had already contacted a lawyer, a ruthless man named Richard Collins, who specialized in high-profile custody cases. Richard had a reputation for winning at any cost, and Michael was willing to pay whatever it took to ensure victory. "We need to paint Jessica as an unfit mother," Michael said during their first meeting. "Her affair, the murder charges, it's all evidence of her instability." Richard nodded, taking notes. "And what about the children?" he asked. "They'll stay with me," Michael replied without hesitation. "I'll make sure they're taken care of." Meanwhile, Jessica's sister, Amanda, was growing increasingly concerned. She had always been close to Jessica, and she couldn't believe her sister was capable of murder. When she heard about the charges, she immediately went to the police station to visit Jessica. "What's going on?" Amanda asked as soon as she saw her sister. "This doesn't make any sense." Jessica hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "It's complicated," she said finally. "But I need your help. Can you look after Lily and Ethan for me?" Amanda nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "Of course. But you need to tell me the truth, Jessica. What really happened?" Jessica took a deep breath. "Michael set me up. He killed Daniel and made it look like I did it. He's trying to take the kids away from me." Amanda's eyes widened in shock. "We have to stop him," she said. "I'll do whatever it takes." With Amanda's help, Jessica began to fight back. She hired a defense attorney, Laura Bennett, who was known for her tenacity and sharp mind. Laura immediately started digging into Michael's background, looking for any evidence that could prove his involvement in Daniel's death. One of the first things Laura did was subpoena Michael's phone records and credit card statements. The records showed that Michael had made several suspicious purchases in the weeks leading up to Daniel's death, including a set of night vision goggles and a disposable coverall. Laura also discovered that Michael had been in contact with Maria, the cleaning lady, on the night of the murder. "This is huge," Laura said during a meeting with Jessica. "If we can prove Michael was at the office that night, we can cast doubt on your confession." Jessica felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. "What about the kids?" she asked. "We'll fight for custody too," Laura assured her. "But we need to focus on clearing your name first." Meanwhile, Amanda was doing her own investigation. She tracked down Maria and convinced her to talk. "Michael paid me to let him into the office that night," Maria admitted. "He said it was a surprise for Jessica, but I didn't know he was going to hurt anyone." Amanda recorded the conversation and immediately sent it to Laura. With this new evidence, Laura filed a motion to have Jessica's charges dismissed. The judge agreed to review the case, and a new hearing was scheduled. Jessica felt a surge of hope, but she knew the fight was far from over. The day of the hearing arrived, and the courtroom was packed. Jessica sat at the defense table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Laura Bennett stood beside her, ready to present their case. Across the room, Michael sat with Richard Collins, his expression calm and collected. He had always been good at hiding his emotions, but Jessica could see the tension in his jaw. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. "This hearing is to determine whether there is sufficient evidence to dismiss the charges against Jessica Miller," the judge began. "Counsel, you may proceed." Laura stood and approached the podium. "Your Honor, we have new evidence that proves my client's innocence and implicates Michael Miller in the murder of Daniel Harris." She presented the phone records, credit card statements, and the recording of Maria's testimony. Michael Miller orchestrated this entire scheme to frame his wife and gain sole custody of their children. He manipulated witnesses, tampered with evidence, and even paid the cleaning lady to let him into the office on the night of the murder. Richard Collins stood to object, but the judge overruled him. "This evidence is compelling," the judge said. "Mr. Collins, do you have anything to add?" Richard hesitated, then shook his head. "No, Your Honor." The judge turned to Michael. "Mr. Miller, do you have anything to say?" Michael stood, his face pale. "This is all a misunderstanding," he said, his voice trembling. "I would never hurt anyone." But his words rang hollow, and the judge wasn't convinced. "Based on the evidence presented, I am dismissing the charges against Jessica Miller," the judge declared. "Furthermore, I am issuing a warrant for the arrest of Michael Miller on charges of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and second-degree murder." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Michael was handcuffed and led away, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. Jessica felt a wave of relief wash over her, but it was short-lived. She knew the fight wasn't over yet. With Michael in custody, Jessica turned her attention to the custody battle. Laura filed a motion to have the previous custody order overturned, and a new hearing was scheduled. This time, Jessica was determined to fight for her children. The hearing was emotional, with both sides presenting their arguments. Richard Collins tried to paint Jessica as an unfit mother, but Laura countered with evidence of Michael's manipulation and abuse. Jessica Miller is a loving and devoted mother who was the victim of a calculated scheme by her husband, Laura argued. She deserves to have custody of her children. The judge listened carefully, then made his decision. "Given the evidence presented, I am granting full custody of Lily and Ethan to Jessica Miller," he said. "Michael Miller will have no contact with the children until further notice." Jessica felt tears of relief stream down her face. She had won, but the victory was bittersweet. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she was ready to do whatever it took to protect her children. In the months that followed, Jessica worked hard to rebuild her life. She started therapy to process the trauma and focused on creating a stable and loving environment for Lily and Ethan. The children struggled to understand what had happened, but Jessica was patient and supportive, helping them through their confusion and grief. Michael's trial was swift. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led away, Jessica felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a lingering sense of betrayal. She had loved Michael once, but now she saw him for who he truly was. One evening, as Jessica tucked Lily and Ethan into bed, Lily looked up at her with wide eyes. "Mommy, is Daddy ever coming back?" she asked. Jessica hesitated, then kissed her daughter's forehead. "No, sweetheart. But we're going to be okay. We have each other, and that's all that matters." As she turned off the light and closed the door, Jessica took a deep breath. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. She had survived Michael's betrayal, and she would do whatever it took to give her children the life they deserved. Jessica's life slowly returned to normal. She reconnected with old friends, took up new hobbies, and even started dating again. She was cautious at first, but she knew she deserved to be happy. One day, as she was walking through the park with Lily and Ethan, she ran into Daniel's sister, Emily Harris. Emily had been devastated by her brother's death, but she had always believed in Jessica's innocence. "I'm so sorry for everything you've been through," Emily said. "Daniel would have wanted you to be happy." Jessica felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "That means a lot." As they walked away, Jessica felt a sense of closure. She had faced unimaginable challenges, but she had come out stronger on the other side. She had her children, her freedom, and a new sense of purpose. And for the first time in a long time, she felt truly at peace.